All right, welcome back to another episode of Livewire. I'm your host, Jared Moore, and today we actually have an in-studio guest. I think this is the first time we've ever done it on Livewire. Host of Muskogee Radio, Gary Fife, recently was awarded a Frank Greer Lifetime Achievement Award from the Oklahoma Society of Professional Journalists, and I thought it would be a really cool thing to have him on the program and just talk about his entire career and all of his experiences and the crazy stuff that's happened to him as he's practiced journalism for how many years, Gary, do you think?
Probably somewhere, let's call it 45.
45 years. That is a wide breadth of experience. And if you guys out there have any questions, go ahead and just like usual, pop them into the chat. And we will try to get them asked, and Gary will try to answer them. My question, and the thing that I found that I think is the most interesting about it is, could you take me back to, like, when did you know that, or was it journalism a thing where you kind of fell into it, or you always knew you wanted to do something like that?
Well, Oklahoma was so closely tied to the oil industry and things like that. And as a young guy, I had a real interest in watching these paleontologists dig up fossils, dinosaur bones and rocks. And I was curious about the rocks and the things and the science there. So I was looking at petroleum geology as a possible career because, I figured it's probably going to be something that'll be around for a while.
Right.
And it probably pays a whole lot better than some of the other kind of ideas I had. But this was during the period of the civil rights movement. Across the nation, many of our minority groups are standing up and saying, we've got to make things change, and taking the actions and the stance to make it happen. And during that period, I was curious, okay, well, where are our Indian people? Indians was the term you used then. Mm-hmm. And where are our issues in this movement? And I said it would be a mistake if there wasn't. But then just about that time, we learned of the occupation of the
Alcatraz
island of Alcatraz out in San Francisco, and that fascinated me. And I think it ignited the flame across young people, Native American people. And I said, well, I want to be a part of that somehow. And I said, well, as a geologist, all you can do is throw rocks, I guess. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I started developing an interest in how those stories are being told. And I'm thinking, well, that's not real accurate. Maybe there might be something there for me. And I was interested in doing some writing and possibly photography. And putting our story out there in a way that people would at learn both sides of the story.
When you went through that gear change, how far along were you on the geology path?
Well, I'd actually begun my first class at Northeastern State College. It was still NSC at the time, that ugly red man thing. And they were pretty limited, so I was thinking, well, my career here isn't going to be very long if I want to pursue this. I'll have to go to OSU or something like that. But then we saw the growth of it beginning to show itself in Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. And a group called the National Indian Youth Council started a chapter locally there. And I was saying, well, this is a way to become involved. But I want people to understand both sides of the story. And now NOYC, bless their hearts, was a very dedicated advocacy group. And for me, to do something had to go far beyond the, let's go get the white man kind of thing.
Right.
And I wanted people to understand, like, both sides of the story. And I thought, well, reporters do this. And so, I asked about getting into journalism there at NSC and got a position on the Northeastern newspaper. And decided this was kind of the way I wanted to go, and I was actually enjoying composing stories. I was on general assignment, so I could be doing, the pancake dinner one day, or the president's speech about, dedicated another brick in a seminary hall or something like that.
And you were working on the school paper there.
Right, yeah. And, it's another reporter general assignment. And shooting pictures. I took photography at the same time.
So do you have any of those that work from that time period, like issues of that paper or anything?
Oh, gosh, no. I've moved several times around the country and decided I didn't want to drag that stuff with me.
Right.
So either I
wonder if the school keeps archives of that. That's such a long time ago, but...
Yeah. I might have one of the yearbooks that might have something in it, but...
It would be an interesting... Or I just, while you're talking about it, I was thinking, how interesting it would be if you could find some topic or something that you wrote about from that paper,
Mm-hmm.
and then do another kind of analysis or opinion of, like, after all the time has passed, like what did you get right, what did you get wrong, those type of things.
Yeah, I don't recall anything that was too specifically geared toward, my feelings. But my wife managed to go through some of my old stuff, and she dug up an old newspaper clipping of me with some of my colleagues, and we were pledging the journalism fraternity. And for gosh sakes, I don't even remember the name of the group. It was Sigma Tau Epsilon or
Right.
Eat a Bama Pie or something like that. I don't recall. And I had just come off the wrestling team in high school, short hair and a black plastic heavy glasses, and a little jacket and tie and the whole thing. And it's light years away from where I was, a couple of years ago, and after that, and began to grow my hair long and show up at some of these events around town. I think there was a Tulsa world photo of a demonstration downtown, or no, it was on campus, and I was standing next to one of the guys from the black student group, and at some point somebody made something in the speech, and we did the old fist up in the air kind of thing, and they caught part of my arm and my fist. And my dad saw that, and I thought, "Oh my God, what is my son doing now?" Because he was pretty, conservative, and
Right.
thought I was nuts for being long hair and not pursuing a real job,
Right.
and that kind of thing. So that's really a lot of what I remembered from then, and then of course keeping those connections with NIYC, and from that. Experience, I got I don't know what would they call it, wasn't a real scholarship or anything. It was like a chance to visit Washington, D.C. with a group of 30 other Indian students from around the nation. And we got in there and were assigned to different agencies to kind of learn what was going on and things. And they stuck me in the BIA and I think Realty Department or something like that. Just completely bored the tears out of me. And at the same time, a couple of groups had come to town and were demonstrating against Congress and things like that, and they asked us to join them. And so, I thought, well, I am enjoying this, going out and saying the way we feel and trying to show the world that, we're still around and these are our concerns and some of the wrongs that needed to be righted. And that convinced me, I wanted to keep doing this. And so I went back to Tahlequah and got through my third year at Northeastern. And that's the time when what they call the University Without Walls movement in educational circles began. And I had a chance to join in with a group we had formed called Flaming Rainbow, University Without Walls. And
what was the symbolism of the the name there, Flaming Rainbow.
Well, it was like the heat and the strength that our people have remembered and still contained, and the anger perhaps of some of the young people against the system.
I see.
And then the rainbow part was, a love for our own people and a willingness to teach and share with the greater community. So we kind of did that thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the other students, were there to, do what they were going to do and make other connections. So while I was there, I had a guy came in with some ideas of making other opportunities happen, and one of them was with what was called the Indian Legal Information Development Service, and they were looking for young people to come in and work with them in Washington, D.C.
Mm.
And I said, hot damn, there's a chance to go back up there and, and be right on the Capitol steps
mm-hmm.
or whatever. And what their function was to examine every piece of legislation that went through Congress. I mean, every piece, whether it had implications for Native people, with land or health or education or whatever else, and then put those into a monthly publication and send it out to a number of tribal governments and other groups around the nation to let them know that this is what Congress is looking at.
Mm-hmm.
And how the government affects our lives so and completely almost. So I figured it made more sense to let our people know what was coming down the pike, rather than after it was already done and then have to go back and complain and gripe.
Right.
So I thought, well, this is this makes sense, and let's do that. So I kept working on that, and was amazed by how the government works or how the government doesn't work,
mm-hmm.
and disillusioned by a lot of what I saw at the BIA and their staff. Some of them at the time didn't give a damn other than getting a paycheck.
Yeah.
And others were looking at a career, do 20 years and retire and that kind of thing. And I said, well, there's a whole lot more possibilities here. Plus, it would benefit our people to have someone here keeping this watchdog on the government.
Absolutely.
So that convinced me to stick with what I was doing. And I came back to Oklahoma and got a job actually with LaDonna Harris.
Oh, really?
Americans for Indian Opportunity as an information person. I was there for a short period, but I learned quite a lot on how things get done. Sometimes a little bit under the table, and
mm-hmm.
how to wheel and deal, because LaDonna was an amazing person at this.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned quite a lot from them, and then that position kind of petered out as nonprofits do. And right after that, the people that I had known at the eyelids, as we called it, were working with the American Indian Press Association, which was the first Native American journalism professional news service, in spite of everyone else claiming their newspaper was first or whatever else.
Mm-hmm.
This was the first. And guys like Chuck Trimble and Richard LaCourse, the giants of our industry, were busy cranking out, a weekly a batch of news releases on the old Royal and Underwood typewriters, click,
right.
click, zing kind of thing. And I got to do a few things there and back them up. And just was amazed and delighted by the reaction we got from Native America for that information coming out. Accurate, timely, with a Native perspective, not necessarily opinion, but it was a news service. It was
mm-hmm.
the perspective. Like, this is how it would affect our land claims, or this is the new guy who's going to run the BIA. Finally, an Indian is going to do it.
Right.
So, we stayed there until the IRS shot us down and was looking for something to do at the time, and bounced around to a alphabet soup of Native organizations in the information perspective. And that included NCAI, National Congress of American Indians, and National Tribal Association, and a couple of others that
So what time period was this?
No,
and also I want to mention to the audience too, if you guys have any questions for Gary about anything, pop them in the chat and we'll ask him. But so when you went to the Congress, what time frame are we at now? You're out of school, right?
Yeah. And I got a degree from Flaming Rainbow, a bachelor of arts. And this was like the end of the 60s, up through the mid to late 70s.
Okay.
Way before computers and things like this. And, we used a mimeograph machine to get this stuff out, and there was no internet or...
Yeah, it's like the time period that the Constitution here was getting passed.
Right. And so we were working our tails off. And I can say that I was privileged to be there when several landmark pieces of legislation were passed that affect us even today, like the Indian Self-Determination Act or land claim by the Taos Blue Lake Pueblo people. It was fantastic. And so we saw a lot of those things in smaller pieces that made some sense, and then we taught people, how important the budget was. Mm-hmm. Without money, you can't do anything.
Right.
And was looking, as this path is my direction. And of course, as jobs do, this position's kind of fizzled out.
Right.
And I had a friend who I'd worked with before, Laura Whitstock, who was in Minneapolis at the time, and they had become producers of one of the first radio magazines called First Person Radio, which half-hour show looked directly at Native affairs, mm-hmm. Tried to develop a cadre of reporters around the nation to produce pieces, not just what we used to laughingly call dance of dysfunction, it's either the powwow and the flowing feathers and stuff, or the drunks down on Skid Row.
Right, the stereotypes.
Right, that was the coverage of Native America during this, most of our career, our history was all episodic. Mm-hmm. And the local news agencies knew nothing about the relationship between our peoples and the federal government. Even our present governor has made that mistake. Mm-hmm. But I saw, this is a chance to educate a lot of people about how this works and why we have to say these kind of things. And if we do a piece on a powwow and a dancer, we tell them what kind of dancer it was and what the outfit they were wearing. If it was a fancy dancer, this is why they wear the bustles and the head brooch.
Right. That's the most important stuff that you could do that is often not done.
Right. Like the difference between a woman in buckskin or a jingle dress.
Right.
Let's get beyond just the flashing colors and say, this is what this means.
Yeah, the pan-Indianism.
Yeah, and we didn't all speak the same language or sing the same songs and this kind of thing. So we produced that for a while. That show is still around up there in Minneapolis, I think. And worked with local public radio, and I saw an opportunity there. Mm-hmm. It's like, this isn't locked into commercial radio, which is, do 10 songs and then a commercial about the car dealers or, whatever.
Yeah, advertisers.
Yeah, and that really sort of annoyed me, man. So public radio is the way to go. It's not just a minute and a half. You can do 7 or 8 minute piece.
Right.
And blend in sound and talk to people that whose voices weren't heard. And for me, that was that was the way to go. I saw the power of broadcast. And I helped out with a couple of TV things. I was actually a TV host at the same time.
What was the program you were hosting?
It was called Medajamo the Messenger.
I see. And what language is
That's Ojibwe.
Ojibwe, okay.
Yeah, in Minneapolis, we're right there in the middle of the city.
Yeah, okay.
And so it was a magazine format, and they said, it's your show, you do whatever you want.
Right.
And up till then, they would do a half hour with, local governmental administrator or someone who had written a book about Native stuff and wasn't necessarily Native, and
right,
just stuff that used to bore me.
How many? Was it just you, or did you have a crew?
It was me.
So you were booking and doing everything?
Host.
Wow.
And then, having to coach the guests because, we'd get local people come on and
Right.
set them in the chair, and all of a sudden they break out in this sweat. Like, hey, man, it's okay. We'll get through it.
I'm particularly curious about that because I know now, just from my own personal experience, of how the process, the actual production process has changed and become much easier, because I kind of went from the generation of, I learned shooting on film and syncing sound and all of that stuff. And then they switched over to like magnetic tape or tape.
Mm-hmm.
And then once they crossed over from that to just digital file format, everything became so much easier. What was your process like for that show?
Well, my introduction to radio with first-person radio was actually getting thrown in to be the newscaster, and I didn't know what I was doing.
Right.
And to produce, whatever show. And at the time, it was still reel-to-reel, quarter-inch tape.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd taken a couple of classes and learned how to edit. The old China marker and a razor blade.
Yep.
And you pull your tape out.
Yep.
Yeah.
Splicing it.
Yeah. These kids today, I don't know how easy they are. And so we do that, yeah. And then, put it together, and then I have to mix my own, put, your basic voiceover and then a sound bed and try and do a mix. And so that was my introduction to radio. But then I saw, like this is pretty cool. This allows me to be creative well as informative, so I can have fun with it.
Right.
So I think one of my earliest pieces I did was on fry bread, which is a subject I love.
And that's something that every native or really from this part of the country, native reporter or anybody you always do. You got to do a fry bread piece.
It's mandatory. It is compulsory.
Yes.
The old frying and things like that. Getting grease all over your microphone.
Yeah,
and stuff like
yeah. Well, that's a situation that everybody wants to be in, is when the fry bread's being made.
Oh, yeah.
You can put them in there; they're happy.
Yeah, we did a segment on the TV show, and had a couple of local cooks come in and do the stuff. And while they were making the bread, that whole TV station cleared out and came down to the studio. I could smell it, like, oh my God, what is that? And then, the old taste test kind of thing. And this lady, this cook, picked up her bread and was right next to the microphone and bit into it. And you hear this crunch. and people are going, oh my God, that smells so good. And so, we cut the piece, and then they all wanted, so we had to tear it up and hand it out.
Yeah.
Greasy fingers all over the TV station, but that was funny. But, I saw, well, you can have fun doing this too.
Absolutely.
And, be informative, teach people how to do this, and have a good time, give some of your own people exposure. Like we're not all the old stoic wise guy standing around in a headdress or the beautiful Indian maiden. There's the elder lady who's got a lot of life and personality to share and things like that. So, we did that for a while, and then, of course, hard times, funding sources kind of caught up with us or failed to catch up with us. And so I was, in between gigs and went back to print and did the newspaper for the local Indian Center.
So what time period are we at now?
Now we're at the, let's call it the mid-'80s.
Okay.
And I was living in, Franklin Avenue, which is like ground central for Poverty Row in the Indian community there. I was, struggling along and trying to find a way to keep myself fed, find a way to make $2 and a hot damn, let's run over to the little Indian market there and, pick up something where I could make a lot of food out of a few bucks.
Right.
So it was pretty tight. And while I was doing that, I was doing a radio show in the local public station called Eardrums. And it was, half hour. I did a lot of music and had fun with it. And the occasional elbow in Uncle Sam's ribcage.
Was that an already established program that you took over?
No.
You invented that?
Yeah, it was
Was the Eardrums, is that yours?
That was all mine.
That's a good one. Eardrums. I gotta remember that one.
Yeah, I should have copyrighted it, I think. I don't think I've ever heard that anywhere else. But anyway, it gave that station more color. I mean, like it was a local public station, and they had the reggae show, and then they had a women's lesbian group doing a program, and then all kinds of community sorts of things. But there were no Indians in there anywhere. I thought, well, we need to fix that. And so I proposed an idea, and I said, yeah, come on in, we'll do it. And that's where I learned to do a live broadcast and, mix my music and interview guests live and stuff like that. I said, yeah, I like doing this. This is fun. But it's also challenging because if you get somebody who's kind of hostile, which some of the AIM guys were, really,
right.
You say, well, you stop berating the white man for a second to explain what you mean.
Right.
And so that...
well, that happens too, or that, from my experience, that happens too with natives generally because they're not often interviewed in any of the media. So it's like when they get in there, they're like, I've only got so much time to get, my whatever core things out. So they're like, I got to get these bullet points out, and they don't realize that the host is like a native and is going to give them the time that they need to talk. You know what I mean? Or that's my experience anyway.
Well, it's also a challenge too, because sometimes you get people who just love to hear their voices on a mic.
Right.
And some of the older guys, would sit down and start to talk to me and said, well, when this first white man first came, he began. I said, no, let's not do this. I haven't got time. Let's shift to the 20th century.
Right.
We need to get some housing here for these kids over here. So let's talk about that. So you had to do that and teach them how to be interviewed sometimes.
Yeah.
Things like that, or not use curse words on the mic.
Yeah.
Things like that. So, that went along, and I was pleased with the result, I think. I wasn't doing it. I was doing it for free. But people in Alaska had the idea of putting together a news service, a radio news service, Alaska Public Radio Network, and wrote a proposal to NPR and their program development service. And big CPB wouldn't hear of it, but this little outfit at NPR would. And so they gave us a minuscule $60,000 grant to start a national Native American news service.
Was that a one-time thing, or is it like a yearly thing?
They thought it was going to be a one-time thing.
Right.
But I surprised the heck out of them. So we got the money. Said, well, how's this going to work? I said, well, I tell you what, you're not going to get reporters to do it for free, so pay them, a little something.
Right.
And that way they would be more interested. And we want a quality service, so they have to be, pretty decent at what they do. And of course, Native Americans weren't in the business much, so didn't know what they were doing. So most of the reportage was from non-Native people. And so I had to educate them. So well, let's put it this way. Our relationship with the feds is not based on race. It is based on treaty rights and a federal government-to-government relationship. So do your story from that point.
And that's still a huge issue.
Yes,
like this building blocks of what the classification of how those things work. I've had myself so many conversations with people where I've had to say to them, the federal government views the tribes as another government, and tribal membership is, according to the federal government and treaties, a political affiliation. It doesn't have anything to do with your genetics or anything else. So, so it's good, or it's bad to hear that it's still a problem. But
and it's not part of the educational process anywhere.
Yeah.
And it's a crying shame.
We're the only ones doing it.
Yeah. So we got to. We'll do it. But what people say, well, what do you mean by that? I said, well, think of it this way. First of all, Congress handles a lot of stuff we're dealing with. No other, quote, race, unquote, has that relationship.
Right.
And think of it this way. When you look at the entire federal government, there is only one agency, well, other sub-agencies, but one dedicated department. The Department of Interior has a Bureau of Indian Affairs. There is no Bureau of African American Affairs, no Bureau of Asian Affairs, but there is the BIA, for good or bad. And so you work from that point of view. And so a lot of what we do is, federally, had been federally controlled and things like that. So understand it from that point. So these tribes have an eyeball-to-eyeball relationship with, the city of Tulsa or the state of Oklahoma, or even the United States government. And so it's kind of it has to elevate your thinking and your coverage of what we've got. And so that was the challenge, is to teach public radio reporters to get off their high horses and saying, well, we're public radio, we care so much, but you don't know your front from your back, let's say, about how Native American affairs work. So we had to teach the white reporters, the African American reporters, what they should be covering in this story, and how they should be doing it. And that when we talk about reservation lands, we're talking about essentially a federal enclave that is separate. Now, Oklahoma is now getting its backside kicked in the McGirt decision, and people trying to understand it. So we try to teach them that, and that Native America is like Europe. The Italians are as different from the Russians as the Apaches are from the Senecas. Or the Creeks, from Ojibways. My wife is Ojibwe, so I better be careful. And so, we don't speak the same language. We don't all ride horses and chase buffalo, and that whole education.
We don't all live in teepees.
You got it.
Shoot buffalo, and etc.
So that was a challenge, and then. When they would come back with a story, I said, well, let's do an edit. And they'd run through what they had. And I said, well, you got a good basis, but here's what you need to change to make it more accurate. And so we'd educate the reporters. And I think we gained a measure of success in doing that. But at the same time, we had to get the station news directors and managers to use our service. It's like we're producing a 5-minute newscast. Plus, we have available a 5-minute feature segment. So if we do a piece, on the drunks of a particular idea, here's what they're facing. This is why they do it, and this is what they sound like. And many of them would never, ever in their whole lives talk to a Native person who had, in the throes of alcoholism. I said, you've got to do that to know what you're dealing with. And so, the good, the bad, and the ugly, so to speak, and teach them that, all the culture and music isn't the same. It's like we don't all settle around tootling on flutes on the hillside. I'm sorry. I said, you send me a piece with a flute in it, it damn sure better be about a flute player. And, we had guys in Oklahoma that, put together a news piece, which is okay, and then they'd stick a flute under it. Excuse me, that's, you're talking about the Kiowa Nation here, but the flute song you're using is Navajo. And so they don't mix.
And that is something, too, that we've published stuff on our YouTube channel. A lot of natives will not brook that, if you do that. We did a piece on, I think it was Indigenous Peoples Day last year, or maybe the year before that. But they had, and forgive me, I don't remember which tribe it was. We cleared it up in our comments, but we played a flute song from another tribe underneath. Now the song was from, they had this performer come to the event and play this song as like the opening of the event, right? But we had a comment on there that said, well, this is a Creek Nation event, or why are you playing the Seneca flute on there? And I went in and told him, I said, this guy was invited to perform, and he performed there, so it's okay. We understand, we know. We're not doing that. So
we had to educate our own people. But sometimes
they weren't going to let, they've been calling out the media so much, they started calling us out, and which I'm okay with. Please,
yeah,
if I make a mistake, point it out to me, because I make a lot of them.
Think of it this way: at least they're paying attention.
Yeah, exactly.
So
but just listening to it, that person was able to identify what song it was and everything. So it's
yeah,
great.
well, yeah, that was what the mission of National Native News. And so, we're challenged by being the first effort to ever, really do an authentic, accurate news service. And so we had to build a network of reporters around the nation. And sometimes they were a little reluctant. Then I had to sell the idea to the news directors who thought, they're going to come on screaming, the white man continues to oppress freedom while loving natives, more after this.
Right.
And I said, no. If you hear that, that's because one of the people that we're talking to said it.
Right.
And this is what they meant, and this is what but that's not necessarily what we're all about.
Right.
And so we, had to convince them, you can't carve out 5 minutes from your BBC broadcast about, British tea drinkers
right.
to talk about the native people of this country. And so I had to do a lot of that. Others, jumped right on it and said, yeah, we'll help you. We'll tear down the white man system. Said, no, that's eventually probably what we'd like to see, but that's not what we're after.
Right.
And so you've got a lot of listeners there who have a chance to be educated.
Well, you can, and this is another thing about that too, is you can't have a discussion politically with anybody about what should be done until everybody has a base knowledge of the facts, just like we were talking about how the legal basis for treaties between two governments and political organizations and things like that. If people don't know that, they can't actually make a good decision about which way to vote about anything, because what they're running on is stuff that's been presented in the entertainment media as opposed to something that they learned in school about history or anything like that. You know what I mean? And
yeah.
That's not a good place to be, even if you're a non-native, to make decisions without any knowledge about the system that you're operating, because you could be easily manipulated. So.
Oh yeah, we're seeing that even today over a lot of radio, including some local stuff. But
so were you producing segments while you were doing? While you were operating through there.
Well, occasionally, when we would have something happening locally where I could take the time. Or that our associate producer, Deanne Hamilton, who was wonderful. Thank God she was there. She could fill in if I had to go out on an assignment. And sometimes, rarely, it would be yours truly that knew the most about this issue or this topic and had to be there, so to speak, to make it work. And so that happened a few times, but mostly it was kind of sitting here in the middle of the web, taking feeds in, calling stations to say, this event is coming up, so send somebody out there. Here's what you need to look for. And then, the technical end of actually producing a piece occasionally when it had to work out.
Is there a story from that period that sticks out to you, something that you got, either you covered or you had a hand in, that you think was like maybe the biggest thing that you did?
Oh, boy. Well, one example, of course, while we were in Alaska was the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. And that story had to be handled, pretty delicately because, you had Alaska Native people all around you.
Well, for anybody who's watching this that maybe doesn't have any idea what you're talking about, what was that?
The Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act was their Congress's way of settling the native claims that had never been settled, like you never paid for the land or conveyed the sovereign status. That's how we got reservations. That's how we have our system down here in the lower 48. God, I haven't said that term in a long time. But up there, they didn't want to do that, and I think it was on purpose. Some Native people say, well, we want a better deal, which, that's fine, it makes sense. But when that deal was finally presented and worked out, what it did was cut up the land and portioned it to corporations rather than tribes, tribal governments. And so you've got a couple of, 4 or 5 native corporations up there that are doing, quite well because they're businesses.
Right.
But they don't have the sovereign rights that the Creek Nation has.
Right.
No law enforcement, no judicial system, and other things like that.
Is that kind of like the issue that we saw with the COVID funds? Because there was a whole kind of battle that played out between the tribes down here and tribal corporations in Alaska, because on that specific technicality, saying they're corporations, they're not governments, that this money's supposed to governments. Okay.
Exactly.
How did that affect? I'm just curious about it myself.
No,
how did that is that? So I know there are tribes in Alaska that tribal members receive payments from oil groups and stuff that are drilling there. Is that related to that, or do you know?
Well, there are a couple of different things. First of all, the corporations, the huge corporations, eventually got a firm to handle this money. But they're not the only game in town. Each village has like a tribal council.
Okay.
And that's more of the government we recognize as, tribe and sovereign. But the big boys got the biggest share of the money, and that really griled a lot of folks because, a lot of those guys, being businessmen, did pretty well. I mean, big bucks. Others, the native out in the bush got zipped. So that was one big thing. Now, there is, of course, like oil royalties paid to native landowners, which is like the tribe, the group. And of course, the corporations develop these things, and so they get a share of what they can carve off too.
I see.
And of course, everyone in Alaska gets paid what's called the Alaska Permanent Fund Dividend. In other words, every person in Alaska gets a piece of the action. And while my wife and I lived there, we each got like a check for $1,500 a year just for living there.
Wow.
And it varied as the market
Now I imagine
fluctuated.
that a lot of that got eaten up from just the extra costs associated with living in Alaska because of the weather and everything.
And there were people who wisely invested it, and others who blew it.
Right.
And we're back in the same boat they were in after having one hell of a party.
When they do that disbursement or they send you that check, is it like one check a year? Is it a monthly thing?
No, it's one check a year.
Does it come with your taxes or something? Or?
Something like that. And everybody jumps on a plane and flies to Seattle and goes to the mall.
Yeah, Alaska's empty for a month.
Yeah,
and then they have to come back.
Yeah, so all the businesses are just rubbing their hands and going, "Oh boy, here it comes." So that's a situation. Now, having said all that, now the corporations rule a lot of the land, but now the legal fights are over regaining sovereignty. It's like, hey guys, when you made the deal, you left this out.
Right.
And there were people who knew damn well what was going on, and what they wanted to do is start separating the natives from the land.
Yeah, and
oil, man, we're talking
that history too.
Sound familiar?
Yeah, well, that history too, also even right now, because there are in political circles the idea that at post-McGirt, right, that the tribes, and specifically the Creek Nation, that we should do some type of business compact or something with Oklahoma to solve these problems, and that a lot of times those things don't go the way that the tribes want them to go, right?
Right, yeah.
So,
but, I think a lot of things have changed now. There is a lot more sophistication among our people, and they go out and hire the right lawyer for a change, or our own people can handle this, but it's not perfect yet. But
and the population density would be different between the Alaskan tribes and us.
Yeah.
But
well, anyway, that's kind of what we did. That was a situation in Alaska. Of course, doing a news service from the end of the time zones was difficult because when we were up trying to put this together at 8 a.m., people in D.C. are going to lunch at noon, and all through the time zones. And the distances at the time. There was no satellite system in place to as there is now. So we did a lot of stuff over the phone. As I say, we were cutting tape and doing that kind of thing. And using what I used to laughingly call the Fred Flintstone technology.
Right.
And then trying to crank it out and get it to Native American reservation areas. And a huge problem there is most of them did not have satellite connections. You know, no dish, no connection to the system.
Right.
So we actually had to prepare our news service and put it on one of those old-fashioned carts. Remember those?
Yeah.
And then slap it into the machine.
Wow.
And we had to set up a timed schedule for each station to call in and get the service. And they call it in and record it as a plan. So that seemed to solve a lot of problems, but we had people who had no feeling for what we were trying to do, and they would call in anytime and totally disrupt that schedule.
Yeah.
And so we had stations saying, hey, we couldn't get in because the line was busy, and so we'd kind of wait, and some phone call would come, and they would pick it up and say, hey, where's the news? And I said, who's this?
Yeah.
I'm calling up to get the news. And I said, are you a news station, a radio station? No, then get off the line. You're interrupting it. And so I had to be the bad guy, get the blank off of our station.
That's
and then
amazing.
finally, more stations got the dish, and I don't know how they're doing. I presume they've disposed of that antique system.
Right.
But one of the weaknesses also was there weren't any or very few Native reporters.
Right.
And,
which is still kind of a problem.
Yeah, and those who called in, they said, well, I'll do a news thing for you. And then, we had to teach them how News 101.
Right.
This is what you got to do. This is who you have to talk to.
Yep.
It has to be quality. You send me a piece of junk and I will not use it, and you will not get paid.
Right.
And we had guys who took it as a joke. One guy called in and said, well, he did his news piece and said, and this is the news from blank, blank, Wisconsin. This is Joe Dez from the Res reporting. I said, no, I'm sorry, no. Use your name for this. He said, no, that's how I'm known on the radio. I said, not on this show.
Right.
I said, you give me a correct name and we'll use the piece because you've done a good job. But I'm not going to turn our radio station into this cute little thing here.
Not everybody that's going to be listening to your program is going to be an Indian and understand, that.
But we're competing with the major networks, and we have to sound good, and we're carried on first National Public Radio System, and then later on American Public Radio System. And I am not going to put this cute little cutesy toy show on with competition like that. Plus, we have to show the world that we know what we're doing and we can sound good.
Right.
So that was, the whole process with National Native News. And I stuck with it for about 8.5 years. And so sometimes you just sort of have to leave something behind.
Right. And I want to remind the audience, if you're watching this, you have a question, just pop it into the chat. So at this point, the next thing that happened, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but you came from down there to Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. How was the transition to working for the tribe down here?
Well, first of all, after I left National Native News, I worked with a local CBS affiliate television station, and I learned the power.
Okay. Down here or in
Alaska?
Okay.
And of course, I had to do the native stories, but that was okay.
Was that what it was? Was it you were like the token Indian guy?
Well, I think they started doing that, but then they found out I was just as good, if not better, than the other people they had working.
Right.
So I got, assignments to go out to the tip of the Aleutian chain. You way out, 50 miles from Russia, or haul in whales with the Inupiat Eskimos on the Arctic Ocean.
We were in the editorial meeting. You were talking about that story, and what was that story like? Could you give us kind of like in a nutshell your experience?
Well, first of all, you had to sort of be invited because they had a lot of people, trying to exploit them. Mm-hmm. And so when you get there, they said, these are the rules. You have to wear white. You have to be quiet and get out of their way. You can't block their vision. Don't use any names unless you have permission, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, we can do that, no problem. And said, plus you have to pay your bodyguards. I said, what? I said, listen, you're up on the Arctic Ocean. You've got all these whale carcasses and blood and meat and blubber all over the place.
Right.
And guess what? Polar bears love to eat. And so, they had to have at least 2 guys out there with AR-15s to kind of watch over us. So we did a lot try to observe the rules. I mean, you have to take this snow machine about 10, 15 miles to the edge of the Arctic Ocean on the ice and stand back. And he said, stay out of their way. And so they'd harpoon the whale and started bringing it in.
Mm-hmm.
But at that point, like, the whole village practically shows up. So we're talking 30 tons of whale.
Wow.
And so, they looped a...
So were they on one boat, or was it...
Oh, no, they were on the ice. They take... When they use their umiaks, their kayaks as...
Spotters, or...
No, they would go out, and sometimes they would actually, harpoon a whale from their umiak. And then, tow it to shore and run the lines up to the crowd, and the crowd would, start pulling it in.
So they're on their kayaks. Did they have engines, or was that just?
Oh no, paddles.
Wow,
You're talking open. Yeah, it was a bigger version of a kayak you might see down here on the Illinois River.
But they're paddling it.
They're paddling it, and it's big enough to handle,
Holy moly.
6 to 8 guys.
That's crazy.
You got it. And to make the final kill, they've got this big, huge. Look like a grenade launcher with a little harpoon in the end of it, and put it in the head and put the animal out of its misery, and then haul it in. And they've got these blocks and tackle and huge ropes, and nobody stands around doing nothing. You all got to help out.
Right.
And so, I can honestly say, I helped them haul in a whale. And
were you the only reporter on that?
Yeah, my cameraman. I said, "You stay on that camera. We're not out here, just to, for grins."
Right.
Yeah, plus, our director's going to want something on tape. And so, I helped them do that, and I felt kind of honored actually to be able to join the community and help.
That's an amazing thing to even imagine, to be at. I can't imagine that. How the logistics and just doing it. Natives will do anything.
Well, they've been doing it for thousands of years.
Yeah,
so they knew what they were doing. So they get it up on the ice, and all of a sudden, the ropes are slack, and these people run and pick up their tools. And if you've ever seen like a Hollywood movie of a medieval battle, with the big long spears, well, they've got these big long blades on the ends of these poles, and it's like just drop down on that whale and start
chopping it.
Yeah, and dressing it and things like that.
Wow.
And so do that, and another guy would hit it with a hook and start peeling the blubber off, and then some of the women would start draining the blood.
Mm-hmm.
And that was amazing, because when they opened it up and the blood started coming through, it was almost boiling hot, and it just bored a hole right through that ice.
Wow.
Just, you could see it steaming and bubbling and things. Bang, right through the ice, man. And then they started pulling out the organs. Mm-hmm. And so, they're pulling intestines and then pulling and pulling and pulling. And, you've got, 30, 40 yards of intestines there.
Wow.
And then they started sharing the meat. And they said, okay, well, this portion is, the best. It goes to the captain and his family. And then the crew members get whatever else.
Right.
And then this is for the community. A big chunk of whale for the community. And while they're doing that, like the daughters and other women are walking around serving the workers. Like make sandwiches and pop and stuff and things like that. And, you're insulting them if you don't take it.
Right.
I said, well, actually, I could use a bologna sandwich right now. And, we're all doing that. And then as the the meat and the blubber is all separated. That's chopped up too into little bite-sized chunks, and taken around to everyone. And once again, if you don't take some and eat it, you're insulting them.
Right.
The community. So I take this piece of blubber and pop it in my mouth, start chewing and chewing and chewing and chewing. It's got a mild seawater taste to it. But darn, if it isn't going anywhere, I just keep chewing. And my cameraman's on me, watching me, and he's starting to laugh. And I said, okay, now it's your turn, Jordan. And gave him some. And
well, I can imagine that part of it, because as a cameraman, those type of stories myself, that's one of the things when you're like, oh boy, here we go. Yeah,
this red-headed white boy is trying to eat this. I said, well, if you can't chew it anymore, you got to swallow it. Just fire it down now.
Right.
Okay, so we both went and did that. Talked about it, and then they take the meat and they store it in what they use for a refrigerator. Might be a hole in the ground, and it stays frozen. And they spend a whole year preparing for that whale hunt. Like they go after caribou to kill it for meat, and sinew to make the ropes and other things, and then they work on their umiaks with that. And then they take walrus and take the hides there for the attic covering, and then a party goes off and picks these young trees to make the structure. So everything they do all year is built around that hunt.
Wow.
And I felt, as I say, I felt honored to be part of it and to see it happen and things like that. Luckily, never did see a polar bear, which is fine with me. But that was, one heck of an experience in Alaska.
Yeah, in the editorial meeting, you're also talking about a story you did in South America. Is that right?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
How did that? Was this at the same period, or was this a different?
Actually, it was just before I went to Alaska. I was still in Minneapolis.
Okay.
One of the guys with the NOIC had been approached by this rich oil man type who wanted to do his personal little trip down to see the primitives in the jungles and record himself doing this, and said, you want to take some Indians with you? Indians meet Indians. And they asked me, hey, you want to go? I said, well, if I do, I have to take my tape deck and camera. And I said, go ahead. And so I did. I jumped on it, and first time I'd ever been out of the country, pretty much. We went to Mexico and then flew into Honduras, where we were going to change planes. And while we're sitting in there, they're waiting. There's soldiers everywhere. And I said, you got to be careful. Don't go outside. Don't wander off, because there are little squads out there that can kill you if they want to. I said, you got it. And then at the time, most of us were wearing jungle boots, getting prepared to be in the jungle. And some of those soldiers saw those and said, wait a minute, what are you guys doing?
Are you guys CIA?
Oh, and I said, well, we're going out to, talk to the local communities and study culture.
Right.
And language and song. And we had to have, the right footwear for it, because, sneakers and leather shoes are not right. And so they consulted some of their higher mucky mucks, and rich guy finally had to pay him off, and they let us go. And we got loaded onto an old C-47, the old twin-engine prop transports, World War II transports. They stuck us on that. And, we were in there with the cargo and everything else. So I was sitting in the back next to a big bag of goat feed, and,
So how old were you at the
gosh, mid-20s, upper 20s.
Okay, so you're a young guy. You're not
adventuresome still.
Freaking out or anything.
I could still do this kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure.
But I did, get a gamma globulin shot before I went, so didn't end up getting
a good idea.
And so, they flew us out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, down along the border, and if you're Central America, and the border, the Rio Coco River between Honduras and Nicaragua. And, the Sandinistas were taking over Nicaragua and being ass blanks. And then, the Hondurans are being hardcore, U.S. backed versus Russian backed. And they said, well, here, we're going to tell you ahead of time, once you get there, you got to be careful and be ready to jump in this hole. Because those guys have Russian helicopters, and they have flown in this area, and if you see one, you better be hidden. And I said, okay, so they put us in this village, and there's this big machine gun in the middle, 51 caliber Chinese thing. And even young guys, you'd see 12 years old, they're carrying AK-47s and things that some of them they'd taken off of dead Sandinistas. They said, if they tell you to do something and ask you, to get out of the way, you darn sure better do it.
Right.
And so, we did, and we hung out there and got prepared. And they put us in a dugout canoe and onto the river. And we had a couple of white guides with us, and one guy's carrying a big-ass shotgun. And another's got an Uzi. And,
was there, at this point, surely you were thinking, this story probably is not going to be as good as me possibly getting killed.
Yeah. It's like, dumped in a river.
Like, where was your fear level at? Was it really high, or was it just like mildly high?
Well, as they say, turn it up to 11. Because I was thinking, here we are in this open canoe in the middle of this damn river, and somebody decides to take some shots at us. We got nowhere to go.
Yeah, and you guys don't have any guns.
Oh, no. I think I had a buck knife with me. That was it. I think, and we don't know what is in this river either, by the way.
Oh, man.
And so, luckily nothing happened there. But we went downstream to this other village that had been burned by the Sandinistas, and they showed us, the skeletal remains of some of the people. And, being Indians we are, we had tobacco with us, and we tried to do a little ceremony for them, and that kind of thing. And the other Indians were looking at us, going, what are they doing? And the white guys had no idea.
Right.
And I managed to get away from the guards, shall we say, and sat down and started talking to this old man there who spoke, in fairly decent English, and he was telling us, oh yeah, he's like, both sides do this to us, Somoza guys come in and like shove us around and tell us what to do, and then Sandinistas come in and like beat up my cousin and stuff like that. And he said, we've got nowhere to go and nothing to do. And they had formed their own militias and things. They had somewhat of a uniform and weapons. And so we went to go hike in the jungle to go take a look at another village. And he says, by the way, when you're on this trail, do not reach out and touch any of the shrubbery. Don't stick your hands in anything. First of all, there is stuff there that will rip the hide right off of you, but there are also poisonous snakes. And once one of those suckers nails you, you're dead, because there's no way we can get you to medical treatment. And plus, the venom would get you within an hour anyway.
Yeah.
So, we're doing that and thinking, oh, God, what have I done? And so we went through there and got a chance to talk to some of the soldiers and kind of socialize as best we could with them. And it was difficult because the language we're talking Indian language. And I remember one interview I tried to do with this young guy. And one of our team members, spoke Spanish. So I asked my question to him, and he translated it from Spanish into one of the Indian languages called Rema, I believe. And he would turn around and talk to another guy going from Rema to Sumo.
Right.
And, they would ask their questions and,
literal telephone.
This is something out of I Love Lucy.
Right.
And, finally I got a response back and tried to keep my interview short because this was getting a little ridiculous. But I thought, it's pretty cool to kind of have to go through this. So we talked to them about, how they wanted, just to be not shot at.
Right.
And we weren't talking lofty, terms like freedoms and sovereignty. They just didn't want to be shot at.
Right.
By either side.
Well, it's kind of like going in a time machine back to like when the Europeans first came to North America.
And so, we went through those experiences and got back to the village, and I wanted to talk to the local folks there and talk to some children, and, went from English to Spanish, and one of them actually spoke enough Spanish to be able to talk.
Mm-hmm.
And we asked them, how do you entertain yourself? And they said, oh, we have music and we sing. And so they sang a song, and I'm not sure whether it was Christian or Mosquito. And it was just amazing to listen to them. It wasn't just amazing choral ability, it's just like the humanity and the sincerity which they sang. And so, we did that, and I recorded it and played it for them. They had never heard their own voices like this, and they were amazed. And I put a set of headphones on one kid, and he's and whatever, and I'm just.
Wow.
And I was watching them, and their parents were coming around. And many of these kids were almost pretty much naked, no clothes.
Right.
They might have a pair of shorts or a little dress that was made out of several patches of cloth.
Mm-hmm. So geography-wise, where were you at this point?
We were along the Rio Coco River is about the best I could tell you right now, because they didn't tell us too much specifically for safety reasons.
Well, so you were in South America?
No, Central America.
Central America. Okay.
Right, between Honduras and Nicaragua.
Okay.
And they had little fortifications built along the riverbank just in case something happened. And things like that, but the villagers are scrounging for anything to eat and things like that. So when we came in, the plane had a load of food with it, in which we put down and started sharing. And I was sitting there watching these people and thinking, my God, they're scrambling so hard just for survival. Mm-hmm. And I thought, dear God, I am never ever going to complain about being poor ever again.
Right.
And the poor little darlings, they were full of tapeworms and stuff like it because they're barefoot and, urinate right there in the middle of something or whatever else, and it's on their feet, up through their system. So, we wrapped it up and got back on this creaky old plane, and as I was watching, a couple of the mechanics, walked out one of the engine nacelles and flipped open a valve, and this liquid started coming out. Mm-hmm. And I asked one of the pilots, what's that? And he says, it's water. He said, your engine was full of water and not gasoline? Oh, we have gasoline, but this is what builds up sometimes in the water, so we have to drain it so the engine will work. Thinking, oh my God, we just flew hundreds of miles in an engine full of water. Jeez, Gary, what possessed you to do?
So when you got back and you put the piece together, is that what the piece was? A sound piece? With those interviews. What was the response?
Well, our native audiences loved it because they had never heard this kind of thing before. Mm-hmm. And Minneapolis is the heart of American Indian movement country, and so you got all these AIM guys. It's really hardcore militant times, like the Belcourt brothers and
right.
That blankety blank Russell Means and Dennis Bank were in the areas from time to time, and those guys didn't like it. Not the piece itself, but the idea that I had gone down there without consulting them, and this rich white man paid for everything.
Right.
And I heard Belcourt on the phone. I was behind him. He didn't know I was there. And he says, "Oh no, we don't allow this. We don't condone it, and we would not have let him go." And I was thinking, you SOB. I'm glad I went then. In spite of the snakes and whatever else.
Right.
And the experience was just amazing. We got to see what that community is like, and there were some funny parts. I mean, we had fun chatting with them. We found out these guys, these soldiers, were just like us. Even the kids, and they'd walk around. We'd be climbing on the truck, and the little guy would run up and hand me his rifle, that AK-47. climb on a truck, and here's your gun bag. And rice and beans for 6 days.
Wow.
And I think on the 7th day they had something that was like fry bread, which is glorious. It was an absolute treat. And their little mess hall, was bamboo, bamboo logs set up on little posts to
You're right.
to seat you, and their tables and things like that. It had been around for a long time. So everybody's sitting down, getting ready to chow down. So I go to sit down, and I picked out a nice spot on one of these bamboo logs, and that sucker broke. I mean, it just didn't crack until it exploded. It was bam, and I was straight down. I kicked this dinner plate up into the air and fell flat on my butt in the mud. And everybody looked at me in shock. And all of a sudden, those soldiers started laughing. And my buddy started laughing. I said, I better laugh too.
Right.
And I had to, and I thought about it. I'm lying there in the mud, I got beans and rice all over me, and splintered bamboo, laying all over the place. And I couldn't help, I just cut loose and just belly laughed. I mean, every once in a while you do that.
Yeah.
And these soldiers were just having a good time with it. And saying, look, the American guy can laugh too.
Yeah.
At himself.
Right.
And, another one ran up with another plate of food and said, we're so sorry. I said, don't worry about it. I said, I'm fine. No, it was pretty good. Then we started laughing again.
Well, it sounds like that's like an adventure anybody would like to have.
Oh, it was. There were the parts that had you, terrified, but then there was fun parts. One of the little side things we had learned was our rich white guy, and the guard said, when you get there, you better dig a foxhole.
Right.
And we said, okay. So we get to, this barracks, and we're standing around, and this rich white guy gets his little shovel out and starts wailing away at the mud and stuff. And we're just sitting there watching him, and the soldiers are beginning, what's he doing?
Right.
And one of our, our white guys says, well, he's digging a foxhole. I said, why? He said, so the helicopters don't get him. I said, well, if that helicopter comes, it's not going to do him any good anyway. So we're watching this, rich white guy digging, this what do we call it? Richard blank blank National Memorial Foxhole. And so, that was it. And got back on the plane, flew back, and we got to Tegucigalpa, down in the hotel, which is
right.
They took us down for dinner, and we ordered steaks and stuff,
Right.
We just tore them apart. And God, man, these blankety blank things are good. And, went on home and got to work and put that piece out, actually several pieces. So that was my other weirdest experience in this business. And after that, it was a lot of dedication to, the regular stories about, new rule changes or a new court is set up. Or,
right.
They were dull compared to some of the, highlights we did. But I'm thinking, we need to know this stuff too. Yeah. I mean, this is important. If there is a new courthouse or somebody gets a grant for medical use, anti-smoking or whatever, that stuff's important too. And we need to know. So that kind of rounded out the rest of my career. And then when I got here, I began with Muskogee Media and got hired by Gerald Wofford to work as a reporter.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't been in the office more than 10 minutes. Just threw my gear down and says, there's a story up here from the Head Start. They're releasing balloons for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
He said, that story's yours. And I go, what? I just got here. He said, well, there it is. And so I said, here's the camera. And I grabbed my little, and had grabbed my little reporter's notebook and went up there and did a piece. And I think I got a shot of these little Indian guys letting these blue balloons go.
Right.
And darn if that didn't win a first place in Naja.
See, right out the gate.
Right out the gate. I said, okay, this job is going to be all kinds of fun, I can see.
Yeah. So when did you go over to the radio program?
Well, I was initially asked to join Gerald and Jason Salzman as a guest to talk about, a little bit about myself and what I felt was important. And they were aware of my radio career. That's one of the reasons I got hired, is because I could supplement them. And a couple things. I think one day one of them couldn't make it, and I was asked to fill in. And I found out that I actually knew what I was doing and could handle myself on a mic and deal with a guest and conduct interviews and things, and knew how to work with an engineer. And so I was called in on a more regular basis, and I believe it was Jason that was other on assignments, working with you more on the TV end of it, both him and Gerald. They asked me if I'd fill in a lot more often. I said, sure, be happy to. And that's kind of the way it evolved. And one day, Jason moved on to a PR, and Gerald decided he was going somewhere else. And they said, it's all yours. I went, oh, gee, here we go.
Yeah.
I said, well, I could produce this, and I could run the board if I just get a little time watching the engineer.
Yep. And for the audience too, if you're watching this, there's a link to Muskogee Radio's YouTube channel in the description of this video. If you want to go check it out and subscribe, that's where if you can't catch it live on the air on AM 1240, it's AM 1240, and then I don't remember what the FM
106.3.
106.3. That's where it's broadcast here locally from Muskogee. But if you're out of the area, you can also catch it on his YouTube channel. It's in the description. So.
And it's live online at 1240.com.
Yes, so you can watch it on there too.
Right. So
or listen to it.
Yeah. It was kind of left in my hands, and I personally wanted to see the show expand. By that time, Gerald had said, "Well, let's go from half an hour to an hour."
Right.
And then he left.
Right.
Well, no, thanks, man. I've got an hour to fill every week. And so I wanted, we needed to do, the program stuff like the educational grants or the deadlines and medical, whatever else, cultural language. And I thought, well, with a full hour, I can do a lot of this.
Yeah, for sure.
We'll break it up into segments and not just 1 hour of what can be boring.
Right.
And then try and spice it up a little occasionally, throw in some music and culture and language. All through my life, we heard that Indian culture, was an oral tradition, and radio was a natural phenomenon for that. And so that's what I wanted to do, is put more native voices on radio, particularly language when we can get it, and in music and art and the funny stuff occasionally.
In your time as the host, what's been your favorite story, or the story that you've done on the radio that you think was like the most interesting thing?
Well, there's, I think, several in several different art forms, and then the chance to speak with some personality types. Like we did almost a full hour with Dennis Banks from Ames. Where's the movement now, and where are we going with it? And is it effective? I dared ask him that. Like, you guys do a lot of marches and stuff, but does it any good?
Right. And is that episode on your YouTube channel?
Yeah, it's there.
So check it out, guys.
And we did a few of those, and then, of course, we spoke to several chiefs, and I don't think they had ever been put on the spot, which I love to do. Yeah. And, membership and citizenship got to hear their voices and answer questions directly, because I'm not one to let somebody just kind of blow me off saying, well, that's a good question and we're going to work hard to solve it. Well, how are you going to solve it? What have you got in mind?
Right.
And I wasn't going to take this PR answer off the top.
Right.
And so we try to do that, and then things like health, COVID, flu, diabetes. That's a big one with us. We did a lot of those, and then of course on the fun part, you have to make that show very listenable and make people want to tune in rather than a duty to listen to it.
Right.
Because that doesn't work and it doesn't last.
No.
So we would get like a musician in, and a couple of my favorites was Carmen Bruner.
Yes.
Yes, a jazz singer, and we got some of her music on there, and she just blew me away.
She's pretty good.
Oh, she's amazing. She's picking up a lot of coverage now and doing a lot of
and Carmen
gigs.
Yeah, Carmen has a YouTube channel too, so just Google or search her on YouTube, Carmen Bruner. She posts stuff to her YouTube channel.
Right, and then Winnie Cooper.
Mm-hmm.
She's got a program down in Bristol that they put on every week. Gorgeous lady. I mean, she's a beautiful young woman, well rooted in her family life and her Christian church, and had the voice of an angel. And so I got her in live with her guitar, and we did a couple of songs right there on the air. And I was going to just turn the show over to her and said, "Keep going, girl."
Yeah.
And we talked about her music and her dedication and how people are beginning to pay attention.
And you're kind of, talking about that story too. You're kind of bringing up the next generation here of the radio.
Oh yeah. We try to talk to young people when we can, like our youth council here, and then young academic athletes or scholars, and let people know what it's like for them, or our royalty, Miss Muskogee and Miss Junior Muskogee, and ask them, what does it mean to you, and does this honor make sense anymore? This kind of thing.
Right. And also want to mention to the audience too, or maybe you can tell me, Gary. Let's say somebody's watching this video and they're a citizen or they're a native and they have something they want to come on your program. How can they get in touch with you to say, hey, I want to come on? Because you do phone interviews, right?
Oh, yeah, we do. We do a lot of them, usually like with a national organization, particularly on national issues. Mm-hmm. We've spoken with NCAI over the phone, National Indian Education Association, the Health Group, Indian Physicians, tribal governments in different places around the country. One of the most things that I'm most proud of, that was most difficult and a lot of fun, was I interviewed the Indian Women's Honor Guard. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure many people are familiar with them, but they're just like, you see the guys in uniform. Mm-hmm. Well, these women wear traditional dresses, so they could be in buckskin and I think mostly jingle dress. Mm-hmm. And they have their service emblems on their backs, big diameter, Army, Navy, Air Force, Navy, everything. And they were marching in the Veterans Parade in New York City.
Oh, wow.
And I called up their coordinator and said, there's some way I can talk with them. And I said, yeah. And I'm thinking, well, I got to get past this. I got to, just a dead phone interview. I said, do any of your people use a Bluetooth? Mm-hmm. That little earpiece that
right.
that you can wear when you're walking or whatever else. They said, "Oh yeah, I do." And I said, "What about the possibility of me calling you while you're marching, while you're in the parade,
right,
walking down the street, and dealing with the crowd?" He said, "No, I'd love to." And so we actually did, when they were going down the street carrying their flags and getting reaction from the New York City crowds and
right,
and their own people, and what it was like. Where were they? What was the reaction? And what kind of pride do you have in showing these people who you are and things like that? And I was proud of that. It's like, there's an innovation no one ever has done before. And I don't care who you are, NPR or APR, whatever. You've never done this. And,
right.
And yours truly has.
And it's on the YouTube channel.
Oh, yeah, it's on you.
But if somebody wanted to get in touch with you, like they would you prefer to get phone calls or you prefer to get emails?
Well, first of all, I have to honestly say, we don't use everything that we hear about. Mm-hmm. We can't. There's no way.
Right.
So I have to pick and choose. And one of them, of course, is the importance of the issue or the topic or the person. You know, like, if it's Sterling Harjo, I'm going to give him a whole show, which we did.
Right.
And talked about res dogs and how much fun that was and what he tried to do. Or, you know, of course, the chief, when they came on, I give them an hour to discuss the top issue. And a couple of times we've done it on the phone, where I did one with Joy Harjo once on the phone, because she was late getting to me. And she's actually in the process of driving to Oklahoma City. And she was on her cell phone, and she pulled up in front of the station. I saw her jump out and run in the door. And she was on her cell phone when she walked into the studio. I said, "Oh, okay, well, she finally joined us." And she hung up her cell and jumped on the mic.
Right.
So, you know, things like that, we can do it. And what it does is it expands the reach of the program.
Right.
And it gives you an opinion of people around the nation who are doing something, I think, that is important to Native people. And, you know, I'm proud of the fact that we can do that. But you also run the risk of getting a crappy phone line.
Right.
And, you know, especially if they're on a cell. And, you know, you get all that interference and, you know, bad sound levels and things like that.
Well, there's always some technical problem.
Yeah, and believe me, we run into it. We've had, you know, the phone cut out on us, or all of a sudden the satellite dish gets knocked out of whack or something, and all of a sudden you're in the middle of a show and now you're not, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Or, you know, sometimes the recording machine breaks down, and so you only get half a show, you know.
Yeah.
You know that one?
CD recorder doesn't work.
And so, you know, we've been through all of those challenges. But for me, you know, I occasionally I will run into somebody, you know, somewhere like over at the Travel Plaza or at the festival, and say, hey, are you that guy who does that radio thing?
Right.
Yeah, hi, I'm Gary. You're never, oh, you're Gary. It's, hey, are you that guy?
Yeah, are you the guy on the radio?
Yeah. And it makes me feel good that people are paying attention, and I think, and I hope, for the right reasons. It's that it's good radio and informative. It's interesting, entertaining, and gives them the chance to hear voices that affect their lives so much.
Yeah. Well, and we've talked about the past. What's in the future for Muskogee Radio, Gary? What do you got planned in the future?
Well, one of the more immediate things is to continue training our staff people on how to do this. Now, right now, we've got Morgan Taylor, who is an associate producer for me, who gives me the chance to take a vacation occasionally, and she is quite competent at doing the show. Not only from the technical standpoint, but she thinks on her feet and can take an idea and turn it into a really good question and then pursue that conversation. So what I hope to do is continue to share that skills with other staff people. And to maybe do a little more experimental kind of things with the program in terms of sound and technical quality. Perhaps we would have a spin-off. There would be another show, maybe half an hour, maybe another hour.
Like a podcast, or?
Possibly, yeah. We're going to talk to that good old Jason about that pretty soon. But, you know, if somebody wanted to come in and do a language program, you know, that would be cool. I know they do it at Cherokee. Or strictly a musical program. You know, we've got so many talented Native musicians here in Muskogee country.
Yeah.
Just have them come in, sit down with a guitar or whatever else, or go out, take a mic out to someplace and record a concert.
Yeah.
Yeah, we went to Jeanette Overall's place, Pickles, and did a creek night there once.
Right.
With their musicians. And Smiling, what's his name? Smiling Vic.
Smiling Vic.
Yeah, I just drew a complete blank there for a second. And, you know, things like that are possible. And then perhaps more live presentations, you know, like we've been out to the festival a couple of times and done a live broadcast there. And we did one with the election forum once, I believe.
Yeah.
And I know you have, and you know what possibilities is there and the impacts.
Yeah.
And so I would have loved to have been able to, you know, go down to Horseshoe Bend and do a live thing from there.
Yeah, for sure.
But, you know, we can maybe still do that and stuff. Native American Day in Tulsa or Muskogee things.
Yep.
Those are different possibilities of getting the program out of the studio and among folks.
Yep, sounds great. Well, we are sitting at an hour and a half, so we've been going for a while. Is there anything that you would like to say about your award or your career that we haven't touched on? Is there something, because I know we talked about in the editorial meeting, you were saying, people don't realize the wide breadth of things that you're exposed to when you are a reporter or a journalist, because you cover so many different segments of society and you go into so many strange situations or dangerous situations, kind of like the stories we were talking about earlier. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to that?
As far as danger goes, I got chased by a buffalo once.
Was that on the news story, or was that just on your own personal time?
That was a news story, a TV crew. We were down in Kodiak, and we were doing, the geography thing, rolling hills and beautiful sea.
Right.
And this little herd of buffalo came over this ridge. And they had a calf with them. And boy, let's get our tails out of here. And anyway, that goes on with them coming after us and flying, man. We were flying. Well, anyway.
Gary does have the energy for
yeah, we've got a few of them. I almost got arrested at an inaugural parade once.
We really need to do a thing where we just do all of the stories. We record them all. We can't do them all right now, but because how could you? It's so many. You've been doing it for so long. I haven't been doing it, but a fraction of what you've been doing it. But you collect these situations and stories that happen to you.
And your original question there was.
Is there anything you'd like to make a statement about your career before we wrap and get out of here?
Well, the
moral of the story.
The moral of the story. I was presented by the Oklahoma chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists, which in itself, being a member, is marvelous. It's like a recognition of your career, but it was a Life Achievement Award. And part of the ornery part of me was thinking, okay, they're giving me an award for achieving life, and still being around in one piece. But then, one of our ex-colleagues here, Sterling Cosper, started reading some excerpts from my resume, and time in D.C. and Alaska, and some other things like that. And I said, oh yeah. I said, yeah, I'm kind of proud of that. And the people are going, yeah, all right. And, some of the, I think, big shots out there were saying, he did stuff that I didn't do. And sometimes got paid for it.
Right. Sometimes.
So, that was it. And I'm thinking, my gosh, the recognition that they're sharing with me today is something that I think I credit to our profession. It's like there is a growing cadre of young Native people joining this field, and they're good. Plus, they've got new technologies they can use to be more creative, like what we've got here. And I'm glad to be able to say that I'm seeing these changes during my lifetime. Going from, D.C. and using a mimeograph machine, you remember those? And putting out our news that way, to being able to instantly broadcast and share things like you do on the net, on our websites.
Yeah.
And people can pick them up right now.
Yeah.
And seeing that happen, the effectiveness and the quality, that's what I'm proud. And I felt like I, in some fashion, was representing those changes and things like that. And I wanted to see this predominantly Stahedke audience out there be aware of it. Saying, we're here. You need some help, we'd be glad to work with you and show you stuff or just answer a question. Okay. And we all benefit by those kinds of changes. So, indeed, I was, just blown away by this gorgeous award. And it took me a while to come down off that cloud.
Well, you don't need to come down.
No, and I'll add this.
Stay there. Stay at that tall, high point. That's one of the things we need to do more of, is celebrate. So. When these types of things.
Hey, I did this. Okay.
Well, I don't. I think natives, or this is just my opinion, but I think it's true. Obviously, natives will celebrate a little bit, but not too much. Just like they'll say, hey, we got to get back to regular business as usual. And I think we can celebrate something like that because, pathfinders, pathfinders in the field is, if you ask me what the moral of your story for your career is like somebody who is cutting a path through virgin territory, really.
Oh, excuse me. And one thing I think is important to mention before we get out of here is the passage of the Freedom of the Press Amendment to the Constitution.
Yes.
I think we all, our whole staff there, fought that battle. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And our supporters.
And the citizens.
Yes. Our council members who backed us, and 76% of Muskogee's citizens who said yes. And so to see that happen, which is one of the huge, major obstacles facing our profession nationwide, and it's still there. But we made progress. We made that step happen.
And the tribe in that instance, the people were pathfinders on that because we're one of the first.
Yes.
If not, or maybe the first in the 5 civilized tribes.
Yes.
So, and with that being said, I think that's a good place to wrap. I do want to mention to the audience, if you've stuck with us for this long, I think at the end of the previous Live Wire, I had said that we were going to have Jason come on with the podcast on Monday, and that stream didn't happen because of me. I want to apologize to everybody. Just had some scheduling problems, but we're going to have Jason come on. We're just working out when he's a busy guy, when he can come in and do it. We're going to have him in the studio too. So, but Gary, I want to thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you.
I hope that people can catch this, even if they didn't see it live, just to hear the stories that you told, because some of that stuff is just unimaginable. But I also think, it's like what you were saying, there's a younger generation coming up into journalism, and those are the types of situations, it's to me, it's kind of like an excuse or a job that just puts you into places where you would never go or think you're going to end up, and then you're there and you're like, okay, I got to also document everything that's happening here and get this back to other people. You're like the tip of the spear in a crazy situation several times. So it's real that from that perspective, the job is awesome. So don't if you're a native kid sitting out there in high school or whatever, that. Just like Gary's part of the story where he's saying he's going to be a geologist, and then he kind of changed gears and went into journalism. Think about it, because, if you're going to be a geologist or something, you may have a better financial prospects, but you're definitely not going to be in as many situations where you don't know what's going to happen next. That's if you ask me, the best type of journalism is you don't really know what's going to happen next. You have any idea. So. But thanks for tuning in, guys. And with that, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, one perhaps a little comic bit.
Sure.
One thing, I had been asked to speak at different conventions and things when I was, with different services. And they think, what was the funniest thing you ever did on radio? I said, well, actually, it's something I didn't do, but we really wanted to. And so we would say, well, let me give you the headlines. And so I'd put on my best radio voice and say, good evening, welcome to National American Indian News. I'm Gary Fife. In today's top story, the White House has just mentioned that it's pulling all American troops out of North America. And secondly, the Bureau of Indian Affairs study reveals that Custer actually won at the Little Bighorn. And finally, Elvis has been alive and well on a reservation in Michigan. More after this.
That's great. Awesome. Well, with that being said, we're going to, once we get that podcast interview scheduled. We'll see you guys again, and thanks so much for coming in. Oh, and I do want to mention, Gary mentioned the word Stahutki earlier. That just means a white person. So that just to clarify for anybody who doesn't speak any Creek out there that's listening, or Muskogee, I guess I should say. I shouldn't say Creek anymore. That's old. So, but with that being said, Chihichoth Lees, and we'll see you again.
Widow.